We're pretty much all in on alcohol to jet. I mean, Mandala's a heifer project, but we just see the ethanol market with an ability to really scale up in Australia, just given a lot of that product comes from agricultural byproduct waste, which we have a lot of. Again, I see heifer with limitations with feedstock in Australia, just given we are a small population and the waste, etc., is just limited, already spoken for. And that's really, so we're all in on alcohol to jet. I'm also mindful of cost. It is still a premium product, but we don't want to be 10 times more than jet fuel or something that particularly some of these powder liquid projects are showing at this point in time.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. My guest today is Edward Mason, the CEO of Jet Zero Australia. Edward is building the first alcohol-to-jet plant to produce sustainable aviation fuel in Townsville, Queensland in Australia. You may not think it's not the Sydney or the Melbourne or the Brisbane, but guess what? Townsville has fantastic advantages of producing sustainable aviation fuel there that Ed tells me about, from easy supply of hydrogen for completely green SAF in the future to military that is nearby and the Air Force that can use this fuel too. Ed talks about the challenges of building a plant from scratch using Lanza technology and finding customers as well. It's a fascinating conversation into what it takes to build SAF supply globally. Welcome to the show, Ed. First of all, I wonder if you can give our listeners an introduction to your key projects, Project Ulysses, which I know as a book, and Project Mandala.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, and pleased to be here today. The two projects, they're SAF projects in Australia. Project Ulysses is our first project, and it's the most advanced. We're looking to use alcohol-to-jet technology licensed by LanzaJet in a $600 million project in Townsville, which, for those of you who don't know where Townsville is, it's northeast Australia, right up on the Barrier Reef there. We're at feed stage on that project and targeting to produce just over 100 million litres of SAF by 2027. And then Project Mandala's another project we recently announced. It's a joint venture with Alperion Bioenergy out of Singapore. It's as much focused on feedstock development opportunities in Australia as it is SAF production, but with some support from the Australian and Singapore governments. That one's going into feasibility studies in the next month, actually. So that's sort of an overview of the two more advanced projects we're working on at the moment.
That's very interesting. For Mandala, how does Singapore get involved? How does this benefit them if you are looking at Australian feedstock and building the plant in Australia?
Yeah, well, look, Alperion have a lot of expertise around feedstock collection in Asia, and one of the largest, and they provide a lot of feedstock into European SAF plants already. We got to know each other through one of our shareholders. We were talking about collaborating on a few things, and I think ultimately they see the same potential we see in Australia, just given the scale of the agricultural industry here and the landmass we've got to develop more feedstock and also potentially work on some SAF production ourselves together. So that's really how that evolved. And we kept it under wraps for a while, but with the government stepping in and supporting us with that, we were forced to announce it. So yeah, pretty exciting project, and means we're in Singapore regularly, which my team are pretty excited about. So that's good.
Okay, well, we are headquartered in Singapore as well, so hopefully we'll get some time to get together with the teams there. I'm curious, you said your parent company is involved already in feedstocks to Europe.
Yeah, Alperion. Look, we just know they're big suppliers of feedstocks. I mean, they're the largest collators of used cooking oil in Asia, and that's from operations, as far west as Bangladesh, all the way out across to Nigeria. and have built a fairly impressive business over the last 15 years. So, yeah, Edward and Chris Chen there, run a great operation. They've been watching us, and yeah, we've over a number of years been kind of talking. So it's pretty good to work with them.
Okay, well, let's talk about Project Ulysses, which is the other one you mentioned. It's $600 million endeavor. What are some of the key factors that are absolutely necessary to make it successful? How are you making sure that these are in place?
Yeah, well, I guess as an alcohol-to-jet project, we're clearly very focused on what LanzaJet are doing at the first commercial scale plant in the world in Freedom Pines that they've got, which is now in commissioning. And we'll know in the next few months what learnings we can take away from that for our plant, given it is one of the first of other plants to be developed at this sort of stage. So, yeah, we're watching that very closely, and we're not really concerned about it, but we just want to learn from it and ensure we incorporate it into our plant, which will be 3 times bigger again. As always with any business, you just got to have a sound development strategy, and for us, that's people and partnerships, and we've got great partners in Airbus, Qantas, and more recently announced Idemitsu involved in the business. And we've also got a great team, and we've really hired some great people out of the oil and gas sector, out of project development sector, and even in sort of feedstock areas. So, yeah, look, we've got great people, and that's obviously the second thing. And then you always need cash, when particularly starting a new industry and a new business. So, again, we've been successful. We have a good finance team, good relationship with bankers, and we've been successfully raising the capital we need to execute on what we've had to date. So that's another important thing about what we do.
Okay, you mentioned alcohol to jet and how Lanza Tech, which is the technology you're licensing, is already doing this in the US, in Georgia. How is that different from what you're trying to do in Australia? I mean, A2J has not been tried at commercial scale in Australia. You'll be the first. What do you need to do differently?
Yeah, well, so LanzaJet are the licensor, but they're obviously a subsidiary of Lanza Tech. Look, we've been following that project, and it's an important project for A2J in general. I mean, particularly if you're trying to finance these projects, banks and others want to see a commercial scale project operating. And so, yeah, we've been working closely with them. We're very confident in the project working and scaling up, but it's clearly a real big enabler to others like us applying alcohol to jet and growing the industry in other places around the world. As I said, I think we're confident in the technology. The processes have been used in refining for some time. Most of them. There's a couple of nuances. There's a new catalyst, things like that we need to see operate. But we want to importantly learn from that project and ensure, ideally, we have version 1.5 for what we're building in Townsville. And just to remind you, we are 3 times bigger again in Townsville. So, we've got to apply that to a slightly bigger project.
And when you say you're 3 times bigger, is your pilot plant already 3 times bigger, or is your end result, the full-scale commercial plant, much bigger?
Yeah, full-scale commercial plant will be 3 times bigger than the Freedom Pines facility that LanzaJet are commissioning at the moment in Georgia. So,
got it.
Yeah, it'll be 100 million litres or around 30 million gallons, depending on what units you're using.
Okay, so if it's 3 times bigger, you will need a lot more feedstock. And you don't want to end up importing feedstock into Australia. So how are you going to be partnering with local farmers, rural communities to source this required agricultural byproducts and energy crops reliably and sustainably?
Yeah, well, the good news in Australia, we had a false start to biofuels about a decade ago, where there was expectation that we would be mandated here to use ethanol for vehicle usage, similar to they do in Brazil and other parts around the world. And that never really transpired on a federal level, and there's only 2 states that mandate it and don't really enforce its use. So we have surplus ethanol capacity in Australia, and that's our feedstock. In fact, one of the plants is closed. The demand was so poor. So what we're doing is really tapping surplus ethanol that's available in this market that comes from agricultural byproducts, and using it in this project as a first. So there's no real impact or no need to develop new feedstock for the first project in Townsville. Likewise with Mandala, we again are looking at longer term feedstock opportunities in Australia. There is, we are a big exporter already to heifer plants around the world with regards to supply there. But we believe there's, particularly on the non-food crop development, significant opportunity here, and working with various partners on that.
It seems like we've got the supply stuff sorted out, or at least the supply side well thought about. What about the demand side? I know you mentioned Qantas as well as Airbus are key backers. How critical is their support, and what kind of support is there for the project from both of them?
Yeah, first of all, it's very important. Both Qantas, Airbus, and now Idemitsu, all three are strategic partners, and not only are they giving us valuable financial support, but it's more so credibility. And look, they're actively involved in the company. They do provide good counsel on us with just what they're seeing, what they need. We've got, I think, a really transparent relationship with all our partners. It's a collaborative effort. I mean, we've all jokingly said we'll walk away from this first project happy if we're all mildly unhappy, just given our interest to just get a project off the ground here in Australia. So, having them here is alongside us is very important, not just for the financial benefit, but really around just the mutual collaboration that we're able to achieve and what we're able to share with each other. In fact, my team are en route as we speak now to Tokyo to have another workshop with Idemitsu and just basically understand, particularly around EPC strategy and how we're executing these projects, what we can learn off each other. So very, very collaborative on that front.
Are they your EPC partner then?
No, we've selected our own EPC partner. And so we've run a competitive tender process. And this is where I kind of look to my project leads who've built multiple oil and gas projects in Australia and around the world. And, we've run a competitive tender process with a number of engineering contractors, which has been beneficial. And have selected our final EPC contractor, which we'll announce shortly, that will be conducting our FEED activities.
Okay, I'd be curious to see what comes out of that, and I'm glad you're doing this thinking. Still sticking to the demand side, beyond Qantas, what is your strategy to secure offtake agreements and gain further airline customers or non-airline customers, both in Australia and outside of Australia?
Yeah, well, let's just touch on Qantas for a sec, because it's obviously an important partner. They've committed to have 10% of their fuel as SAF by 2030, and that equates to around 600 million litres. And just a reminder, our first project in Townsville, which we're targeting for 2027, is only 100 million litres. So they need sort of 6 of these projects and almost one every year beyond that to meet their targets alone. So Qantas are very keen, as you can imagine, and supportive for the offtake as needed. But we have other parties interested. Airbus clearly has an aggressive decarbonisation target for their business. They're the ones effectively selling the planes, and every time those planes take off from Toulouse or wherever it's manufactured, they're emitting Scope 3 emissions. So, Airbus is keen for customers, not just Qantas, that are using their aircraft to be sourcing SAF and reducing their Scope 3 emissions. And then we have Idemitsu's acting on behalf of a number of airlines in Japan who clearly need to meet those mandated targets by 2030, which is 10%. So they're sourcing product, and then we get approaches from a number of people. And I think, what I often tell, particularly some of the people in Australia that have seen false starts in biofuels, this time it is different. This time mandates are driving the demand and providing a floor for that demand regardless. And so it's a huge opportunity, particularly for Australia, to capitalise on as we try and develop this industry.
You mentioned Qantas' total needs, but it's also clear that they won't be coming to you for all of their needs.
Who knows? I mean, Qantas are lifting some fuel out of London at the moment, but we get approaches out of Asia and countries, particularly those with mandate for additional supply. They'll be, they've got a fund with Airbus to try and promote more production in Australia, and it was a great initiative from them, and we've obviously been the first beneficiary of that. But they need to find more projects to deploy that capital in just to meet their own targets.
Absolutely. 2 questions still staying on the demand side. One is around SAF pricing. Ultimately, when SAF is pumped into these planes, replacing jet fuel, what do you expect the pricing to be? And secondly, what about Scope 3 emitters? Are you working with large corporations who need to take care of their Scope 3 emissions to take care of this demand as well?
Yeah, well, so first of all, when we completed our feasibility study last year on Project Ulysses, we, in our assumptions, assumed no government support, no tax incentives. It was a traditional project finance lens we looked at the project through, as if it was an oil and gas project, like a similar project in Australia. So we came out with a SAF price on that, and with relatively high cost of capital that was ballpark with what we're seeing in Singapore and other markets in this region that are producing. It wasn't in line or below, but it was not that far off that we felt we had a no-go project. So that's why we've pushed ahead and just completed that funding of $30 million just to complete FEED. Saying that, I think we've got a bit of work to do on our side as well, and we are doing it just to differentiate SAF from other SAF. I think Australia, and in particular our Project Ulysses, is producing a very high quality product. We are using agricultural byproducts. We have a very low carbon intensity score compared to what we're seeing elsewhere. And there's a bit more of a positive story around it than just it being SAF. And, we're advancing ways to sort of demonstrate that. And our customers are certainly telling us that's as important as just ticking the box on using SAF. So, that's an aspect that we think we're very confident on with respect to what we can produce in Australia and deliver into the SAF market.
That's great. I recently remember, I think it was Alaska Airlines that partnered with 12 in the US and Microsoft to sign a deal where Microsoft's Scope 3 emissions were taken care of through an investment into 12, which would then supply this fuel into Alaska Airlines. I believe American has also done something similar with Citibank and a local fuel supplier in Texas. Are these the kind of deals you're looking at as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't marketed anything yet, but we do believe the Scope 3 credits are an important part of the capital structure, whether that's considered a prepay, whether it's a hybrid instrument. But the demand for Scope 3, and it is a byproduct, we call it, of the SAF production, or maybe the SAF's a byproduct of the Scope 3. You could look at it either way. But there is demand for both, and that needs to be considered, and we consider that when we're looking at the project finance for our first project. So, it is, and it is an area we're very focused on. Our customers are focused on it. Importantly, they just want to know the provenance and the traceability and everything that comes with it is very transparent, and that's a big bit of work that we're doing in line with just developing the project.
Got it. Let's look at Australia as a whole. You've got a large landmass and a potential for deep, cheap renewable energy as well. What's Australia's bigger SAF potential?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, unlike a lot of other commodities we're good at extracting in this country and exporting, we're actually the end customer for SAF. And I keep reminding it, it's not like iron ore or coal where the end customer is Asia. We're actually the end customer. We're the 8th biggest consumer of fuel in the world for jet fuel. We are the worst almost. I think we're top 2 or 3 per capita of emissions when we fly. I mean, we travel long distances. A lot of people here.
It's because Australia is just so far. So almost all flights are long haul.
Exactly. And I think the busiest route in the world, or the second busiest, is Melbourne, Sydney. I mean, there's a flight every 10 minutes leaving either airport. So, we're big emitters.
You need a high-speed train. You need a train.
Well, they've looked and far, I agree. But we need the product. So that's the first thing, and that's why this industry is really important. And I think secondly, because of what you highlight, we have the scale of agricultural industry. We have the infrastructure along particularly the East Coast to move the product around. I mean, most of the cities are around the coastline. And we have a lot of knowledge, particularly around agriculture, that we can utilise to really grow this. So, we think Australia has a big role to play. That's why we're pushing government and why we're pushing ahead with our projects, because we just believe that this is an industry that will grow and be a big supply, not just to the Australian market, but regionally.
I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to hear the potential there. Do you think this is just as much about energy security for Australia?
Yeah, energy security and regional jobs. So, look, I travelled to parts of Australia where, to be honest, and even some of the audience I talk to are still probably climate skeptics in some parts. And I won't even talk about the carbon benefits that this industry brings to aviation, but it's about the jobs and it's the regional security. And while we're, I think, the biggest gas exporter in the world still, or Qatar might be just one ahead, we import most of our oil. Now, those supply lines come through regions where the Defence Department are very keen to protect those supply lines. So, that's an area of focus. But another area is regional jobs, and particularly in places in northern Australia, which are remote. There is a strong push from government to develop those industries, to provide jobs, to grow industries outside the cities. And that's what this does, because you want to be close to the feedstock. And that's naturally when, particularly, you're looking at agricultural byproducts outside the cities. So, yeah, there's a lot of benefits just beyond the carbon story that is associated with SAF. And we're trying to ensure that the public is aware of that.
I'm glad to hear and I'm glad to learn. Now, you do emphasize a lot of local employment in Townsville, Queensland. How many of these construction jobs and ongoing jobs will go to local residents versus outside specialists like the EPC companies you're contracting? And are you going to be training them? I mean, this is all something new coming to local economies. How does this work?
Yeah, well, look, we've calculated the majority of the construction budget will go to Australia. We've looking at 1,000 jobs during construction. And 100 full-time jobs post-construction for this plant. And I think, importantly, focus on the jobs post-construction, because they're the ones there for forever. And a good half of those are fairly skilled jobs. And that's also a problem for us. We need to be training, and we need to recognise where those skilled workforces are going to come from in these regional centres. But the benefit with Townsville in particular is it's seeing a huge investment in hydrogen, in renewable power, in other kind of investments around the renewable space. And so we are seeing the government invest in hydrogen training programs, and a lot of those skills, particularly around biofuels, we're able to leverage off that. So there's a bit of give and pull, but yeah, in a nutshell, very positive. And the other thing to just remember is getting this industry up here isn't about just necessarily the full-time jobs or the construction jobs, but we're impacting a fairly big aviation energy industry here. And we work out it's around 350,000 people that down the supply chain are impacted by the development of SAF in this country.
Wow, I love this parallel, because I know currently aviation already talks about the jobs it supports and the travel industry as a whole. And it almost seems like this green transition is not about killing current jobs. It's about creating a new category of jobs. And I'm glad to see you're supporting it.
Yeah. And look, the Bioenergy Council here have done some work, and Qantas and Airbus, and the industry alone, we're looking at around 18,000 jobs in the next few years if we are successful in getting the projects off the ground, we believe. So, huge positive job opportunity here. And again, I think we all fear in the industry that if we don't get the industry up and running, it'd be a damn shame if we're exporting the feedstock, seeing it developed and manufactured overseas, and then importing it back to Sydney or Brisbane Airport for us to fly on, because we are the end customer. So, let's get our act into gear and make sure this happens.
Well, that does sound like a compelling argument. Now, let's talk about carbon intensity of not SAF, but SAF plants. You're constructing a plant, and hence SAF plants are very carbon intensive. Are you considering or pursuing additional equity investors or lenders to diversify funding sources for Project Ulysses? Or what are you doing to overarchingly bring down your carbon intensity for the plants and the construction?
Yeah, okay. So, first of all, the carbon intensity for the plant, when we look at construction, and we haven't completed the full numbers because we haven't completed feed yet on construction emissions, but the positive about being in Townsville is there is a lot of renewable power available. It's seen something like $30 billion of investment in solar, wind, and hydrogen in that sector alone up there. So we are able to utilise a lot of that energy in the construction and the use of that. And we're in fact right next door to Arc Energy's hydrogen plant, and they're bringing in Hyzon trucks and all sorts of things. That's going to be exciting if we can use that or not. Again, that can really bring down the carbon intensity. When we're talking funding, we look across the capital stack. We're certainly from debt to prepays to the equity contributions. We're hoping, and it looks encouraging, particularly given recent announcements from the federal government that there's funding coming through to the SAF industry over the foreseeable future to support that and support projects and ultimately reduce the cost of capital for these initial developments. And then beyond that, we hope that as these projects are up and running, the risk profile reduces and the cost of capital reduces. The other benefit, I think, with SAF is we do deal with some fairly big balance sheets or industries through the supply chain, particularly airports, and they're backed by a lot of infrastructure funds that also have very aggressive net zero targets. So they're trying to be involved in the supply chain and assist at how they can. So again, opportunities with regards to financing down the track.
Okay, well, still talking about finance, government funding has been critical, and you've benefited from it. But if we go back just a few years in Australia, it was a completely different government with a completely different approach, and government policy has been critical in getting you where you are today. What specific policy support or incentives would most help Jet Zero, and is this a risk for you?
Economic cycles change, governments change, and I think, again, the benefit for the SAF industry is it's not just about carbon intensity, but it's about jobs, it's about fuel security, and we find for that reason we get strong bipartisan government support. So, whether it's the current government or the shadow government, we've found very little pushback in what we're trying to achieve in the regions we operate for this project. And I think that's important for any SAF business. There will be change through the cycle of the project, and you've got to make sure you're managing both sides of government and addressing their policies to get to the finish line, so to speak. So that's what we do a lot of. Currently, the policy has been improving with the federal government. Our projects in Queensland, out of all the states, has been the most proactive in setting an agenda for biofuels. They have a 10-year biofuel roadmap. The government has been supporting renewable projects, in particularly places like Townsville. So we're very excited about where the state's heading. From a federal standpoint, they've just announced a week ago in the federal budget $1.7 billion allocated to a federal agency arena here for the development of a number of specific focus areas, including SAF. And then they're also, considering, for the first time, it was formally acknowledged, considering mandates for this country, which would then follow Singapore, Japan, and others, and clearly is the stick approach to driving demand.
Well, it will be nice to see a combination of carrot and sticks, because we see in Europe lots of sticks and in US lots of carrots. So if Australia can do a blend of those in whatever proportion, it will be interesting to see the results. Now, still looking at the government, I know you're working with the Australian Defence Forces as well. What are some of the technical requirements to supply military versus commercial customers, and how are you engaging with the ADF?
We talk to the ADF, just given where we're based. Townsville is the garrison hub and the headquarters effectively now for the Army expansion in Australia. And naturally, there's benefits from SAF production for fuel security, as discussed. There's no formal policy from Defence on what they're going to do with SAF yet. They're certainly learning from projects like us. I think it's important that, like us, is focused on Freedom Pines and the LanzaJet commercial scale plant. They see some samples come out of that, and we share a lot of equipment with the US, and I know the US will probably be trialling some of that fuel that's coming out of Freedom Pines just to ensure that it's suitable for what they need for their aircraft. So there's a number of considerations, but the Army will make their decision as and when they decide they want to make a move forward into SAF more formally.
I have to ask you this. Why are you in Townsville, Queensland? Because Queensland is beautiful. I've been to Gold Coast. You could have been on Gold Coast, Brisbane, somewhere where there is some passenger traffic or commercial traffic. In Townsville, I see a beach called Secret Beach. I see an island called Magnetic Island. it sounds shrouded in secrecy and far from anywhere else.
Yeah, look, a number of reasons, and people far smarter than me that have built refineries for multinational companies in my business did a detailed review of where best to put this plant a number of years ago. And it was a number of factors, not one single, that stood out for us. I think, first of all, Townsville is a focus for government. It has been a big beneficiary of significant investment in renewable projects up there. We need hydrogen. We were planning on making our own hydrogen, but we're right next to a green hydrogen plant, so we can use that. We've got 4 PPAs for renewable power up there, so we're able to tick that box. Clearly there's benefits, as you just touched on earlier, with defence being based there, and an ability to potentially supply them fuel at some point. We are also in a region that is central to theoretically the largest feedstock supply for SAF in the region, which is sugarcane. And there is a lot of space out west to consider other crops, non-food crops, for supply of feedstock over the longer term. And then, I might add, just Townsville in general has been, a really supportive community to this project. There's not many places, it's a biorefinery, it's clean, there's no bad products, but there's not many places in the east coast of Australia where you would want to attempt to build a refinery. In Australia, we're pretty good at closing refineries. We've gone from 7 to 2. But Townsville as an industrial centre, and with our plant right next to the Korea zinc refinery, we knew we'd have a fairly streamlined approval process, which has materialised. We have great support for it, and that's another big consideration. And I might add, it's fairly commercial land that we're able to acquire in that region as well, versus Brisbane and Gold Coast and some other areas. So a number of factors, and they all pointed to Townsville, and I'm pleased to say we're still there.
I'm glad to hear, and thank you for sharing this rationale. It's not always clear why these decisions get taken, because, of course, you're in Gold Coast competing with land for a roller coaster or something like that, and that's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, and they have a massive port investment going on, an airport investment, so there's a lot of growth, and we can bring in product, we can export products. We're only 8 kilometres from port. A lot of those considerations were taken in as well. So.
So let's talk a little about that. You said you're 8 kilometers from port. Given that Townsville is so remote, how will you get SAF to the large airports in Australia? Not just Cairns, which is the closest, but also Sydney, Melbourne, Perth. Is there a pipeline? Will you ship it over? Will you truck it over?
Yeah, shipping is the plan, given we are so close to port. Cairns is 4-hour drive away, and we could deliver from this first plant all our SAF to Cairns, and it would be a 50% blend, and they could consume it all. And Richard Barker there is pretty keen to get it. We talk with them, and we're working logistically how that can happen. Brisbane Airport are also very keen for SAF, and we also have a Green Olympics in 2032 in Queensland and Brisbane. So there's some targets around that the government's trying to set for Queensland, and again would facilitate that. So it'll go to those 2 regions. There is an ability to move it further south, but with this supply that we've got, I think it will ultimately stay regional. And as you're probably aware from book and claim, it can be booked or claimed anywhere from its usage, and we want to keep that carbon intensity score low, so we do want to see it used locally.
This is a bit of a confusing part from what we spoke earlier. Qantas is one of your big backers, but neither Cairns or Brisbane is one of the Qantas hubs. In fact, Virgin Australia is based in Brisbane, not Qantas. So is book and claim going to play a big part for you going forward? Where do you see it fitting in?
Yes, it will. And just remember, even if it was in Sydney, it goes through the Zhuhai, the hub. So every plane's getting it, whether it's Qantas, Singapore Airlines, Cathay. It's going on other aircraft carriers. It's just Qantas is booking it, and Qantas's customers are claiming the Scope 3 benefits. So, book and claim is going to play a material role in this, as it has in the US and other parts of the world, and we're just working on that adoption ourselves.
Will you be looking to create your own book and claim tool, or use an existing one like Amex GBT?
We know there's multiples out there, and every time I get on a conference call with a new group, it's kind of we're building our own book and claim. We announced a partnership with Trovio recently in Australia, who've built a registry or built registries already for the government with regards to guarantee of origin for hydrogen and other commodities, just to ensure that we were developing a book and claim system bespoke for Australia and bespoke for what we were trying to do with our project, which was really capitalise on the emissions through the life cycle from farm to wing. Whether that is something that is what we adopt at the end, it might be a combination. I know the Australian government really look at the whole supply chain versus international voluntary standards are quite specific at a certain stage of the life cycle and where they start crediting. So, we're conducting this exercise. They're a very reputable party. We're excited about some of the initial findings from that workshop, and we'll be, continuing accordingly until such time we feel an international product is a better offering.
Okay, well, good luck with that. I'm going to be keeping my eyes there because I think book and claim is quite exciting to see it go. Scaling up Project Ulysses or developing additional projects will require significantly more ethanol feedstock. Currently, you're alcohol to jet. Are you considering different pathways in the future as well?
We're pretty much all in on alcohol to jet. I mean, Mandala's a heifer project, but we just see the ethanol market with an ability to really scale up in Australia, just given a lot of that product comes from agricultural byproduct waste, which we have a lot of. Again, I see heifer with limitations with feedstock in Australia, just given we are a small population and the waste, etc., is just limited, already spoken for. And that's really, so we're all in on alcohol to jet. I'm also mindful of cost. It is still a premium product, but we don't want to be 10 times more than jet fuel or something that particularly some of these powderly projects are showing at this point in time. As where they're coming out with. So yeah, alcohol to jet's our focus. We also see that the ethanol market can be significant in Australia and it's already significant globally. And while we don't intend to source any ethanol internationally, particularly for Ulysses, it ensures that there's backup for plants if there were issues, and financiers certainly want to know that that's available. So it's great to have a liquid, sizable market for some of these projects and bankability.
What about the funding side of it? Will the funding needs grow as you scale as well? Because I've heard figures from 2 billion a plant to something higher. You've said 600 million. That sounds cheap to me compared to other projects.
Yeah, so our 600's on a class 4 feasibility. It could go up and down. It probably goes up like every project, but at least we're not in the billions. And look, I've had a history and an experience in funding mining and oil and gas projects around the world. There's a lot of good projects, but as soon as you get into a couple of $1 billion, there's a very few pathways to fund that other than a few counterparties. So, what we're doing in Townsville is a doable project within a reasonable range that can be funded. Clearly, bigger is better, particularly given the economies of scale you get. And if we really want to bring down SAF pricing, you want to go big. But, one step at a time. And I think, again, to ensure you get the kind of cost of capital you need for those bigger projects, to ensure you get the backing you need, we need a few more of these A to J projects up and running to give the confidence that that's doable. And
when do you expect to be producing the first drop of SAF?
Yeah, at the moment, the timeline's pointing to 2027. So that's, still a few years out, but it feels like tomorrow given all the work that's going on.
Right. And do you expect to be commercial scale by 2032 in time for the Green Olympics in Brisbane?
Well, this will be commercial scale, right? It's 30 million gallons, but
Okay.
yeah, look, if we've got several projects in the pipeline, Mandala's one we've publicly announced that's sitting there. So we could well be, in a position by 2030 to have a couple of projects that are meeting whatever Australia needs to satisfy a mandate by then.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear. And if you look at the far future, long-term vision, what's your long-term vision for company growth? Are you looking to export this technology beyond Australia, or are you going to have multiple plants around Australia? What's the impact of decarbonizing aviation in Australia and the region going to be?
Yeah, well, I don't need to sell to you. The demand outweighs the supply, so there's huge potential to keep growing and keep building projects. And our intention is to be meeting that market need with multiple projects. Now, we're a bioenergy company. We're all project energy people. We're not tech people, even though we have some tech people. But so we're kind of agnostic to the technology as long as it's bankable and it's de-risked to the point that we feel we can deliver the project. So, our intention is we think Australia is well positioned to supply a lot of SAF, both domestically and within the region. So there's no shortage of projects here. We are, considering a couple of projects outside of Australia that we've been approached by parties to work on. So I wouldn't rule out international expansion, but yeah, there's a lot going on.
Well, I do wish you good luck with that. This has been fascinating to hear of the story of developing Australia's first alcohol-to-jet plant and getting to commercial scale SAF in just a few years. Thank you for discussing so many aspects from policy to demand to also energy security and feedstock supply. This has been enlightening, to say the least. The final part of this interview is what we call the rapid fire round, in which we get to know Ed Mason personally. And not just the viewers. This is a segment that's very popular amongst employees of companies as well. Generally, when I have airline executives, this is the fun part. So why don't we start with something simple? Ed, what's your favorite airline that is not Qantas?
Good call, yeah. Qantas aren't bad, but they're good. I don't know. Look, I probably would say Cathay Pacific. I've flown them a heap, and they've been really, really good over the years. And there's a couple of good regional airlines here that are fantastic, Alliance and others that always have great, staff and give you the country service of, talking to you. So yeah, there's a few. Okay.
Favorite airport?
Favorite airport? Probably Cairns Airport, actually. If you land there, it's tropical, first of all, so I think your stress levels drop immediately when you land. And then they've got these almost hallucinogenic fish that have these mouths at the baggage carousel. So if you're standing at the baggage carousel, it comes out of this tropical fish's mouth. It's quite funny. And yeah, they're good people at the airport. Richard and Alan and the guys. So yeah, Cairns Airport would be the favourite one.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear. I've not been to Cairns, and this is the first time Cairns is being mentioned on this podcast. So I'm definitely going to be keen to check it out when I can. Perhaps to come see the opening of your plant. What is something you would like to learn?
Yeah, good question. My wife would say iron shirts. I keep trying, but I can't really, do it. I don't know, probably a language or something. Yeah, we're learning enough at Jet Zero on SAF, so I need a distraction, something else.
Exactly. Okay, I'm jumping around a bit. What's your favorite movie?
Well, I'm more of a sports guy, but I'm watching some stuff with the kids at the moment. I watched a movie, This Is the End, with Seth Rogen, a weird sort of combination of aliens and blood and stuff that my daughters liked. Yeah, that's probably it.
All right, we'll go with that. When we do have kids, very often we tend to have overlaps with their favorites and our favorites. So I can see where this might be coming from. What's your favorite book, Ed? There was a book, I've probably only read start to finish 5 books in my life, so there's not many to choose from. There was a book I once read when I was doing some work with a Russian bank on Sale of the Century, and it was a wild ride of communism and how it sort of unfolded. And it's probably the most interesting thing I've read for a while. Wow. Okay. I have obviously not read that one, but I'll add it to my list. What do you do in your free time? As I said, I'm sort of a sport guy, so back my local rugby team, the Cowboys.
do a bit of fishing, and I've got into mountain biking the last few years. So where I can, when I'm out of the city, I'm bike riding. Although in Sydney, that's sort of generally to the pub. But yeah, that's what I do on my weekends.
Right. Okay, makes sense. If we are speaking a year from now and we are popping champagne, what are we celebrating?
Yeah, hopefully we're going into final investment decision and breaking dirt on Ulysses. That's what we all want to see, and that'll be the most exciting thing to do. But I'm happy to just pop champagne anyway with you in a year. Let's do it.
Okay, sounds good. And finally, what is the best piece of advice you've received yet?
If you believe it, go big. And I think we're only here for a short time, and investors get impatient. So run fast, run hard, and go big. And I think that's whether that's companies I've followed or companies we're trying to do here. Things we're trying to do within Jet Zero. That's been pretty good advice that I've always received.
Okay, fantastic. Well, on that note, Ed, thank you very much for your time and for sharing some insights into developing SAF and what it takes to be successful in Australia. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Shashank.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simpliflying, that's simply with an i.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simpliflying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simpliflying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our supervising editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Mira Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimain is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simpliflying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.